Hello, happy Wednesday. How's everybody doing? I see Books, Brews, and Booze, and Sharkies, and Farmhouse. Hey, everybody. How's your week going? The cats, and what does it say on that mug emoji? Is that is that a custom one? Let's talk about books. Ah, nice, nice, nice. Oh, how is everyone? How am I? I am a little tired, but that's nothing new. It's looking a bit gray outside right now. It rained yesterday evening. Didn't rain too much today. I was expecting rain today, but it looks those clouds look pretty ponderous, like they're ready to rain. Sharky say, "Yay, books! Yay, books!" Just finished getting the kids settled into some popcorn and Clone Wars. Nice. I'm Farmhouse and I are part way through Clone Wars, but we haven't been watching it too regularly. We started doing this like galaxy brain watch of just everything Star Wars. So it was like watch episode 4, then watch Rogue One, and then episode 5, and then go back to episode 1, 2, 3. No, episode 1, then Clone Wars, then 2, 3? Something like that? Or was it 1, 2, then Clone Wars, then 3? Anyways. Um, I see. 1, 2, Clone Wars, 3. Right. And then, I guess after that, probably Solo fit in somewhere. Unless Solo wasn't out yet when we started this whole thing. It was a weird, complicated, like, you know, watching it in a certain way so that you can see links between certain events and draw parallels between characters and things like that. But we we slowed down once we hit Clone Wars because there's just so much of it. Farmer says there's some weirdness with the order of Clone Wars. Well, that's just because those episodes weren't released in the right order. Um, but that's not to do with the Galaxy Brain thing. That's just literally that the Clone Wars series is in sort of a jumbled order. The episodes were not released chronologically as they were intended to be released for some reason. And we've got tickets for Friday night after the book stream. We're going to go see Doctor Strange. So, it'll be a late night viewing of that one. So that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to that. I've been trying to avoid spoilers. Apparently, Farmhouse has had one character spoiled, which is unfortunate. But anything that's not in the trailers, and I've only watched the like first trailer they released. I've caught a few seconds of the second one accidentally as I was, scrolling past or something and it autoplayed. Sharky's a pretty big Star Wars fan. Just look through your game collection and realize you have a plethora of Star Wars games. The Lego Star Wars Skywalker saga has just come out like this month and is quite fun. I would, if you like Lego games, if you like Star Wars, if you haven't tried Lego games, I don't know, it's very funny. They've got a great sense of humor. Brooks says that Doctor Strange looks cool. Bummer about the spoiler. It's frustrating. Yeah. Yeah, it's always. I don't know. I'm into, a lot of geekery, Marvel movies, and Star Wars, and whatever else. Um, so when one of the bigger movies like this one comes around, I try to see it earlier just so that I don't have to worry about spoilers. Sharky say Lego games get fairly repetitive in their gameplay, but they're funny. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say there's a decent amount of differences between all the different types of characters in this one, and it's all 9 movies, so it's massive, like all 9 numbered movies. Um, and there's like 380 different characters, but of course, a lot of them are very similar, right? Most of the hero characters are going to be similar to each other, but those are all like handled pretty differently from a Jedi or from a scavenger or from a bounty hunter. A little similar to a bounty hunter, but not the same. They can do different things. Um, and then there's a lot of like extra characters that handle very differently. Sharkies think it's a good plan. Avoid spoilers if they could, but sometimes you can't resist a trailer. It depends for me. Sometimes I don't want to see trailers at all. And then sometimes, I don't know, like if a new Star Wars movie is coming out, watching the trailers is part of the experience for me. It's, like part of getting hyped up for it, and it has been since I was a kid, right? I remember when the prequels were announced for the first time and downloading a trailer for episode 1 on dial-up internet and like having to restart the download a million times because I kept getting impatient and trying to watch it before it was finished, and then that would screw everything up. So for me, there are some films where it's like, yeah, watching a trailer is part of it, and then there's some where I don't want spoilers, where I want to go in knowing as little as possible. The Marvel movies, for some reason, are kind of a mix for me. Sometimes I want to watch trailers, and sometimes I don't. I don't know what the determining factor is there. And the last episode of Moon Knight is out today. I've been enjoying that. Um, it's an unusual series because first of all, I'd say he's somewhat of a more obscure character, Moon Knight, and second of all, it's one of those touchy ones where they're dealing with mental illness in it, and so I think they've got to be really careful. And I know a little bit about DID, but I wouldn't say I'm educated with it, and so I'm not the one to say whether or not they've been doing a good job in their portrayal of it or not. Farmhouse got the spoiler from an article that wasn't about the movie. Yeah, that's extra. Like, the person writing that, what are they thinking? Why would you do that? I don't know. I hope that people let them know that, hey, you're posting spoilers for a movie that's not even out yet. But yeah, Moon Knight. It's been entertaining. I think it's been well done so far. Um, I don't know if it's going to be for everybody. And I don't know whether their portrayal of the mental illness sort of situation has been positive or not. I haven't watched the final episode yet. Tonight or tomorrow for that, I guess. But it's out now, so if you were waiting for all the episodes to be out before watching it, bump the camera. But yeah, I think the character of Moon Knight is very interesting, even before this film, but I or series. But I also haven't really gone and read Moon Knight comics. It's just what I know about the character from, encountering him in games and secondhand exposure to the character. Seeing people talk about the character. And, like, pages of comics, but not, like, I haven't gone and fully read through. And I think that some things of the character have been changed for this series. But I won't say anything much about that because, spoilers, Farmos appreciates so far that Moon Knight has not made it like he's powerful because of his DID, because you don't want to mysticize it and not villainize him, which is another thing you get with a lot of mental illness, like only making villains mentally ill. Chuck, you say there's a few shows like that we have on our bucket list, waiting to get Amazon Prime till there's more shows on we want to see, since there's one you kickstarted. Oh, what show is that? There have been a few good shows on Amazon Prime. We just have it because we've got like a Prime membership for shipping and things like that, and it comes with the video service. It's a weird... Amazon Prime is weird because it's like there's some good content on there. There are some good shows. But then there'll be like, you'll search for a movie, you'll be like, what service is this movie on? You'll search Amazon Prime for the movie and it'll come up and you're like, oh, it's here. And then you go to it and it's like, it's available with this other subscription that you have to pay for, or you can rent it for X amount of money and things like that. Not every time, but it's frustrating being like, oh, that's what I want to watch. Oh, I can't because I have to pay more for it. The Legend of Vox Machina. I see. Farmos finished Wolf Like Me already? Ah, it was very short, I see. So what did you get for kickstarting? Like, was it literally just give them money so that they can make their show, or did you get something as a result? Because usually, like, if I kickstart something, it's something that if it gets funded, then they make the thing, and then I get that thing, right? But now you're saying, like, you need to watch it on Amazon Prime. So what do you actually get for funding it? Most of the Kickstarters I've done have been, like, 3D printer projects or a game or two. One was this neat, like, pixel art D&D character creator thing. So you can, like, you're supposed to be able to save your, like, create your character sheet in there as well, but it doesn't work very well for that. But you can make little pixel art of your character, which is fun. Exported a fairly low tier, so you got some... Oh, okay. Gotcha. Ringtones and sounds. So, I don't think... Books, Brews, and Booze, I don't think you were here on Friday, were you? I feel like things started to get a little bit more serious in some ways in the book on Friday. Where did we actually start? It was on like page 48 or something. Yeah, I think that's right. We had Granny riding her broom, meeting up with Magrat and Githa, Nanny Og again. Magrat's got a new familiar, a tortoise. Was it a tortoise or a turtle? Tortoise. Apparently Magrat's got bad luck with familiars. Oh, you watched the video on demand. Awesome. So yeah. The tax man had a run-in with Lord Felmet. Had to go submit himself for some torturings. And it seemed like Lord Felmet's mental health, speaking of, was, I was going to say rapidly deteriorating, but at this point we've had like time skips of like over a year or like more than a year. um, and it is continuing to progress, is the deterioration. And then we had a conversation, a three-way conversation between the Duke, the Duchess, and the Fool, in which the Fool commented that the best way to fight magic was with words. Basically a rumor campaign against the witches, right? What's that word? What's the word for that? Like basically, it's slander, but that's not what I'm thinking of. Where you are performing a rumor campaign to like undermine somebody's authority and trustworthiness, reputation. Smear campaign, propaganda is what I was thinking of, but yeah, like a smear campaign. So that doesn't sound like it's going to necessarily be a fun time for our witches. And then we had the whole bit with Granny and something not being right out in the world at Hogswatch night. And she was looking smaller and smaller and smaller, trying to find what it was. Something wasn't right. And then the implication was that it was actually something big. And then there was a big old earthquake at Lancre Castle, which is when the three-way conversation actually took place, with Lord Felmet kind of, screaming into the night and things like that. And, crone, evil eye, stupid old woman, said the Fool. It's the witches, whispered the Duke to no one in particular. We must tell the world about the witches. They're evil. They make it come back, the blood. Even sandpaper doesn't work. And that's where we left off. Lord Felmet's having a bad time of things. Oh boy. So I'm on page 68 in my copy, which I think we established lined up with others, but maybe it didn't. Mrs. just made it in just in time before we start reading. Welcome, Mrs. Sharkey. Hey. I hope you weren't rushing too much. All right, well, on that note, why don't we get to it? So page 68. There was another tremor as Granny Weatherwax hurried along the narrow, frozen pathways in the forest. A lump of snow slipped off a tree branch and poured over her hat. This wasn't right, she knew. Never mind about the whatever it was. But it was unheard of for a witch to go out on Hogswatch night. It was against all tradition. No one knew why, but that wasn't the point. She came out onto the moorland and pounded across the brittle heather, which had been scoured of snow by the wind. There was a crescent moon near the horizon, and its pale glow lit up the mountains that towered over her. It was a different world up there, and one even a witch would rarely venture into. It was a landscape left over from the frosty birth of the world, all green ice and knife-edge ridges and deep, secret valleys. It was a landscape never intended for human beings, not hostile, any more than a brick or cloud is hostile, but terribly, terribly uncaring. Except that, this time, it was watching her. A mind quite unlike any other she had ever encountered, was giving her a great deal of its attention. She glared up at the icy slopes, half expecting to see a mountainous shadow move against the stars. "Who are you?" she shouted. "What do you want?" Her voice bounced and echoed among the rocks. There was a distant boom of an avalanche high among the peaks. I just noticed there's a footnote somewhere on this page. Let me make sure I haven't passed by it already. Where is that? Oh, it's right at the end of this page. On the crest of the moor, where, in the summer, partridges lurked among the bushes like small, whirring idiots, was a standing stone where partridges lurked among the bushes like small, whirring idiots. All right. Random burn on partridges, I guess. Farmo says, wow, someone does not like partridges. Was a standing stone. It stood roughly where the witches' territories met, although the boundaries were never formally marked out. The stone was about the same height as a tall man, and made of bluish-tinted rock. It was considered intensely magical, because, although there was only one of it, no one had ever been able to count it. If it saw anyone looking at it speculatively, it shuffled behind them. It was the most self-effacing monolith ever discovered. Okay. It was also one of the numerous discharge points for the magic that accumulated in the ramtops. The ground around it for several yards was bare of snow and steamed gently. The stone began to edge away and watched her suspiciously from behind a tree. She waited for 10 minutes until Magrat came hurrying up the path from Mad Stoat, a village whose good-natured inhabitants were getting used to ear massage and flower-based homeopathic remedies for everything short of actual decapitation. Footnote: they worked. Witches' remedies generally did, regardless of the actual form of delivery. The names of all of the villages in the Ramtops. We've got Mad Stoat. I remember Bad Ass. Does anyone remember any other village names? I'm sure there was at least one other weird one. I guess wherever Nanny Og is. She, Magrat, was out of breath, and wore only a shawl over a nightdress that, if Magrat had anything to reveal, would have been very revealing. "You felt it too?" she said. Granny nodded. "Where's Githa?" she said. They looked down the path that led to Lancre Town, a huddle of lights in the snowy gloom. Oh, right. Nanny Og just lived in Lancre Town. Sharkies feel like, of all the fantasy writers they've read, Pratchett is the most descriptive of magic's interaction with nature, and not just how humanoids use magic. Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Like, with a few exceptions of, like, a world tree or something like that, that is, one specific thing that is very magical. I feel like Pratchett's got a lot of just magical things happening in nature. I can think of one other, but it's a bad example. and that's the Xanth books by Piers Anthony, which, let me note, I would not recommend reading because holy moly, in retrospect, is that ever awful reading. But magical stuff's happening all over the place everywhere you look in those books. But Books, Brews, and Booze says, can I just say that the monolith is my favorite character in this entire book so far? This rock just hiding behind a tree being like, what are you up to? No face, no eyes, just a blue stone leaning out from behind a tree. All right. Lancre Town, a huddle of lights in the snowy gloom. Sharkies are picturing no face. Farmo says, fantasy shows and tabletop games, I feel like, do more of the nature magic stuff usually. I guess it's probably easier to show than tell. Maybe. Or maybe people find it that way or don't think about it enough when they're just writing normally. All right. There was a party going on. Light poured out into the street. A line of people were winding in and out of Nanny Ogg's house, from inside which came occasional shrieks of laughter and the sounds of breaking glass and children grizzling. Children grizzling? Is that something that's going to get explained here? Because what I want to do right now is stop and ask what the heck children grizzling sounds like, but experience is leading me to believe that that will shortly be explained once I ask that question. Sounds of breaking glass and children grizzling. Oh, Farmo says, crying fretfully. Okay. All right. I don't know if I've ever seen that word anywhere else. It was clear that family life was being experienced to its limits in that house. The two witches stood uncertainly in the street. Sharkies can hear that. UK slang, apparently. Ah. Do you think we should go in? Said Magrat diffidently. It's not as though we were invited, and we haven't brought a bottle. Sounds to me as if there's a deal too many bottles in there already, said Granny Weatherwax disapprovingly. A man staggered out of the doorway, burped, bumped into Granny, said, Happy Hogswatch night, missus, glanced up at her face, and sobered up instantly. Miss, snapped Granny. I am most frightfully sorry, he began. Granny swept imperiously past him. Come, Magrat, she commanded. The din inside hovered around the pain threshold. I've been to those parties. I've been to one of those parties fairly recently. Nanny Ogg got around the Hogswatch night tradition by inviting the whole village in, and the air in the room was already beyond the reach of pollution controls. Granny navigated through the press of bodies by the sound of a cracked voice explaining to the world at large that, compared to an unbelievable variety of other animals, the hedgehog was quite fortunate. Nanny Ogg was sitting in a chair by the fire with a quart mug in one hand, and was conducting the reprise? I feel like that's one of those words that can go either way. With a cigar. She grinned when she saw Granny's face. What ho, my old boiler? She screeched above the din. just me laughing at my own voice there.
See, you turned up then. Have a drink. Have two. What's her, Magrat? Pull up a chair and call the cat a bastard.
Why? Not that he isn't. Grebo, who was curled up in the inglenook, 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 and watching the festivities with one slit yellow eye, flicked his tail once or twice. Granny sat down stiffly, a ramrod figure of decency. "We're not staying," she said, glaring at Magrat, who was tentatively reaching out toward a bowl of peanuts. "I can see you're busy. We just wondered whether you might have noticed anything tonight, a little while ago." Nanny Ogg wrinkled her forehead.
Our Darren's eldest was sick, she said. Been at his dad's beer.
"Unless he was extremely ill," said Granny. "I doubt if it was what I was referring to." She made a complex occult sign in the air, which Nanny totally ignored.
"Someone tried to dance on the table," she said. "Fell into our Reed's pumpkin dip. We had a good laugh."
Granny waggled her eyebrows and placed a meaningful finger alongside her nose. "I was alluding to things of a different nature," she hinted darkly. Nanny Ogg peered at her.
"Something wrong with your eye, Esme?"
she hazarded. Granny Weatherwax sighed. "Extremely worrying developments of a magical tendency are even now afoot," she said loudly. The room went quiet, because of course it did. That's how it goes, right? Alright, I think Farmos is saying about an inglenook, a partially enclosed hearth area adjoining the fireplace. Yeah, that sounds about right. That's, based on the context, that fits. That's so specific. A partially enclosed hearth area adjoining the fireplace is an inglenook. I don't know. I don't know if I have an inglenook in my house. The room went quiet. Everyone stared at the witches, except for Darren's eldest, who took advantage of the opportunity to continue his alcoholic experiments. Then, swiftly as they had fled, several dozen conversations hurriedly got back into gear. "It might be a good idea if we can go and talk somewhere more private," said Granny, as the comforting hubbub streamed over them again. They ended up in the wash-house, where Granny tried to give an account of the mind she had encountered. "It's out there somewhere, in the mountains and the high forests," she said, "and it is very big." "I thought it was looking for someone," said Magrat. "It put me in mind of a large dog. You know, lost. Puzzled." Granny thought about this. Now she came to think of it. "Yes," she said, "something like that. A big dog." "Worried," said Magrat. "Searching," said Granny. "And getting angry," said Magrat. "Yes," said Granny, staring fixedly at Nanny.
"Could be a troll,"
said Nanny Og.
I left best part of a pint in there, you know, she added reproachfully.
I know what a troll's mind feels like, Githa, said Granny. She didn't snap the words out. Maybe I read it wrong then. I know what a troll's mind feels like, Githa, said Granny. She didn't snap the words out. In fact, it was the quiet way she said them that made Nanny hesitate.
They say there's really big trolls up toward the hub,
said Nanny slowly.
And ice giants, and big hairy wasp names that live above the snow line. But you don't mean anything like that, do you?
No.
Oh.
Magrat shivered. She told herself that a witch had absolute control over her own body, and the goose pimples under her thin nightdress were just a figment of her own imagination. The trouble was, she had an excellent imagination. Nanny Og sighed.
We'd better have a look then, she said,
and took the lid off the copper. Nanny Og never used her wash-house, since all her washing was done by the daughters-in-law, a tribe of gray-faced, subdued women whose names she had never bothered to remember. Farmo says that I don't have an Inglenook unless I count the Nap Nook, but it's not really the same. I was looking at the Nap Nook. I don't know if... Yeah. Sharky say, we cannot have an Inglenook as we have no fireplace. We have... I'm going to move the camera, so I hope this doesn't make anybody feel nauseated. We've got a fireplace down here, and you'll notice that we've got a little mattress and blanket in that little spot there with a like a pillow sort of thing. It's very nice in the winter, especially if you want to like lay down and have a nap or read a book or something. So we call that the Nap Nook. Okay, this is readjust. Yeah, that's better. Farmo says, it's so messy, don't look too closely. It's not that messy. It's a little messy. There's some stuff there, but it's like, oh no, a jumbled blanket. Farmo says, it is very cozy, though. Yeah, you get the, you know, if you're cold, whatever, if you've come in from outside and you're chilly, you just go and get the fireplace going. You were thinking the mantle. I'm pretty sure that's just a mantle. All right, so it had become the wash house, therefore a storage place for dried up old bulbs, burnt out cauldrons, and fermenting jars of wasp jam. Wasp jam? Wasp jam. Fermenting jars of wasp jam. Another UK thing, maybe? No fire had been lit under the copper for 10 years. Its bricks were crumbling, and rare ferns grew around the firebox. Rare ferns. Its bricks were... no, I already read that. The water under the lid was inky black and, according to rumor, bottomless. The Og grandchildren were encouraged to believe that monsters from the dawn of time dwelt in its depths, since Nanny believed that a bit of thrilling and pointless terror was an essential ingredient of the magic of childhood. Sharkies say, I would hope like honey made by wasps more than jam made from wasps, but being witches could be either. And Farmo says that the internet does not know what wasp jam is, or that Farmos hasn't been able to find it anyways. So, Nanny believed that a bit of thrilling and pointless terror was an essential ingredient of the magic of childhood. get that. In summer, she used it as a beer cooler.
It'll have to do. I think perhaps we should join hands, she said. And you, Magrat, make sure the door's shut.
What are you going to try? Said Granny. Since they were on Nanny's territory, the choice was entirely up to her.
I always say you can't go wrong with a good invocation, said Nanny. Haven't done one for years.
Granny Weatherwax frowned. Magrat said, Oh, but you can't. Not here. You need a cauldron, and a magic sword, and an octagram, and spices, and all sorts of stuff. Granny and Nanny exchanged glances. It's not her fault, said Granny. It's all them grimmers she was bought. She turned to Magrat. You don't need none of that, she said. You need headology. Headology. I don't know if that's the first time that's come up in this book. It will not be the last time it comes up in the Witches series, I am certain. Sharky say regarding a bit of thrilling and pointless terror of childhood. Being an elder millennial, I feel like that describes kids' media from the 70s and 80s. Yeah, definitely some of it, yep. Farmus thinks that wasp jam might be referring to jam set out as traps for wasps. Sharkies were thinking that as well. You need headology. She looked around the ancient washroom. You just use whatever you've got, she said. She picked up the bleached copper stick and weighed it thoughtfully in her hand. We conjure and abjure thee by means of this. Granny hardly paused. Sharp and terrible copper stick. The waters in the boiler rippled gently. See how we scatter, Magrat sighed. Rather old washing soda and some extremely hard soap flakes. In thy honor. Really, Nanny, I don't think. Silence! Now you, Githa.
And I invoke and bind thee with the balding scrubbing brush of art and the washboard of protection, said Nanny, waving it. The ringer attachment fell off. Honesty is all very well, whispered Magrat wretchedly, but somehow it isn't the same. You listen to me, my girl, said Granny. Demons don't care about the outward shape of things. It's what you think that matters. Get on with it. You know, honestly, that makes more sense to me than, like, you know, these specific Latin words. If you say these specific Latin words, then magic happens. Because magic understands your language? I don't know about that, right? Sharky say pretty sure headology came up in equal rights, and Farmos is pretty sure that's what she's taking in school right now. Sharkies love the practicality of the witch's magic. Yeah, no, like honestly, it makes more sense to me that, you know, these things have meaning because we give them meaning, and therefore they are magical. So if that's the case, then you should be able to give that meaning to just about anything. Unless it's the number of people that give it meaning that's important, in which case that may not work so well. Farmo says, unless it's the specific sounds you're making, and, you know, Latin just happens to make those sounds. Maybe. Maybe if it's just like you could just go, oh, and as long as you make the right sounds, then it works. I don't know. Like Hank.
Farmhouse did this. We got some kind of fan art. Like the details on the little wand. And of course, the hat. Farmo says Untitled Goose Wizard. And clearly doing magic. You can tell because the sound is right there. So that's going to have to go up on the wall. On the wall behind me back there. Look at that little wand. Little gem on there. Look at that little face. And the little hat. Sharky say he is the best goose. Anyways, Magrat tried to imagine that the bleached and ancient bar of lye soap was the rarest of scented whatever, ungulates or whatever they were, from distant Clatch. It was an effort. The gods alone knew what kind of demon would respond to a summoning like this. Granny was also a little uneasy. She didn't much care for demons in any case, and all this business with incantations and implements whiffed of wizardry. It was pandering to the things, making them feel important. Demons ought to come when they were called. I think I emphasized that wrong. It was pandering to the things, making them feel important. Demons ought to come when they were called. But protocol dictated that the host witch had the choice, and Nanny quite liked demons, who were male. Or apparently so. Oh boy, Nanny. At this point, Granny was alternately cajoling and threatening the netherworld with 2 feet of bleached wood. She was impressed at her own daring. The waters seethed a little, became very still, and then, with a sudden movement and a little popping noise, mounded up into a head. Magrat dropped her soap. It was a good-looking head, maybe a little cruel around the eyes and beaky about the nose, but nevertheless handsome in a hard kind of way. There was nothing surprising about this, since the demon was only extending an image of itself into this reality. It might as well make a good job of it. It turned slowly, a gleaming black statue in the fitful moonlight. "Well," it said. "Who are you?" said Granny bluntly. The head revolved to face her. "My name is unpronounceable in your tongue, woman," it said. "I'll be the judge of that," warned Granny, and added, "Don't you call me woman." I don't know what to do here. "Very well." "My name is Wixertledlepixels," said the demon smugly. "Where were you when the vowels were handed out? Behind the door?" said Nanny Og. "Well, mister," Granny hesitated only fractionally, "Wixertledlepixels. I accept you're wondering why we called you here tonight." I hope it doesn't do this to me too many more times.
You're not supposed to say that, said the demon. You're supposed to say,
Shut up. We have the sword of art and the octagram of protection, I warn you.
Please yourself. They look like a washboard and a copper stick to me, sneered the demon.
Granny glanced sideways. The corner of the washroom was stacked with kindling wood, with a very big sawhorse in front of it. She stared fixedly at the demon and, without looking, brought the stick down hard across the thick timber. The dead silence that followed was broken only by the two perfectly sliced halves of the sawhorse teetering backward and forward, unfolding slowly into the heap of kindling. The demon's face remained impassive.
You are allowed 3 questions, it said.
Is there something strange at large in the kingdom? Said Granny. It appeared to think about it. And no lying, said Magrat earnestly. Otherwise, it'll be the scrubbing brush for you.
You mean stranger than usual?
Get on with it, said Nanny. My feet are freezing out here.
No, there is nothing strange.
But we felt it, Magrat began.
Hold on, said Granny.
Her lips moved soundlessly. Demons were like genies, or philosophy professors. If you didn't word things exactly right, they delighted in giving you absolutely accurate and completely misleading answers. Demons were like genies or philosophy professors. Shark, you say, like all of us who were threatened with being hit by wooden spoons as kids? If said wooden spoon could slice through a sawhorse. It was an impressive feat, wasn't it? Now, here's the thing that I'm slightly confused by. I guess I don't know what the copper is. No, I guess the copper is the basin, right? But no, because he says, they look like a washboard and a copper stick to me, but it's also been described as bleached wood. So is a copper stick bleached wood? I don't fully understand. Maybe it's because you use it to poke into like a copper tub or something. All right, so is there something in the kingdom that wasn't there before? She hazarded.
No.
Tradition said that there could be only 3 questions. Granny tried to formulate one that couldn't be deliberately misunderstood. Then she decided that this was playing the wrong game.
What the hell's going on? She said carefully. And no mucking about trying to wriggle out of it. Otherwise I'll boil you.
The demon appeared to hesitate. This was obviously a new approach.
Magrat, just kick that kindling over here, will you? Said Granny. I protest at this treatment, said the demon, its voice tinged with uncertainty. Yes, well, we haven't got time to bandy legs with you all night, said Granny. These word games might be all right for wizards, but we've got other fish to fry.
Or boil,
said Nanny. Look, said the demon, and now there was a whine of terror in its voice. We're not supposed to volunteer information just like that. There are rules, you know.
There's some old oil in the can on the shelf, Magrat, said Nanny.
If I simply tell you, the demon began. Yes, said Granny encouragingly. You won't let on, will you? It implored. Not a word, promised Granny. Lips are sealed, said Magrat. There is nothing new in the kingdom, said the demon. But the land has woken up. What do you mean? Said Granny. It's unhappy. It wants a king that cares for it. How? Magrat began, but Granny waved her into silence. You don't mean people, do you? She said. The glistening head shook. No, I didn't think so. What? Nanny began. Granny put a finger to her lips. She turned and walked to the washhouse's window, a dusty spiderweb graveyard of faded butterfly wings and last summer's blue bottles. A faint glow beyond the frosted panes suggested that, against all reason, a new day would soon dawn. Can you tell us why? She said, without turning around. She'd felt the mind of a whole country. She was rather impressed. I'm just a demon. What do I know? Only what is, not the why and how of it. I see. May I go now? Please? Granny jerked upright again. Oh, yes. Run along, she said distractedly. Thank you. The head didn't move. It hung around like a hotel porter who has just carried 15 suitcases up 10 flights of stairs, shown everyone where the bathroom is, plumped up the pillows, and feels he has adjusted all the curtains he is going to adjust. You wouldn't mind banishing me, would you? Said the demon, when no one seemed to be taking the hint. What? Said Granny, who was thinking again. Only I'd feel better for being properly banished. Run along lacks that certain something, said the head. Oh, well, if it gives you any pleasure. Magrat? Yes, said Magrat, startled. Granny tossed the copper stick to her. Do the honors, will you? She said. Feel like Magrat's the one that would want to do that correctly, but not necessarily the one that would know how to do it correctly. Let's find out. Magrat caught the stick by what she hoped Granny was imagining as the handle, and smiled. Certainly. Right. Okay. Begone, foul fiend, unto the blackest pit. The head smiled contentedly as the words rolled over it. This was more like it. Okay. It melted back into the waters of the copper, like candle wax under a flame. Its last contemptuous comment, almost lost in the swirl, was, Run along. All right. Granny went home alone as the cold pink light of dawn glided across the snow and let herself into her cottage. The goats were uneasy in their outhouse. The starlings muttered and rattled their false teeth under the roof. The mice were squeaking behind the kitchen dresser. The starlings muttered and rattled their false teeth under the roof. Is that just because, like, they're making, like, a noise, like teeth chattering? There have been a few things today where I'm like, what does this mean? Sharky say beaks, and Farmo says chattering, I guess. Yeah. Farmo says starlings make weird noises. The Sharky say they collect teeth.
a new and terrifying bit of information about starlings. Yeah, the tooth fairy is just a polite tale we tell children to hide the more terrifying truth. She made a pot of tea, conscious that every sound in the kitchen. And Chucky's saying, "Oh no, there's some who have made a nest in our building. Guard your teeth." She made a pot of tea, conscious that every sound in the kitchen seemed slightly louder than it ought to be. When she dropped the spoon into the sink, it sounded like a bell being hit with a hammer. She always felt uncomfortable after getting involved in organized magic, or, as she would put it, out of sorts with herself. She found herself wandering around the place, looking for things to do, and then forgetting them when they were half complete. She paced back and forth across the cold flagstones. It is at times like this that the mind finds the oddest jobs to do in order to avoid its primary purpose, i.e., thinking about things. If anyone had been watching, they would have been amazed at the sheer dedication with which Granny tackled such tasks as cleaning the teapot stand, rooting ancient nuts out of the fruit bowl on the dresser, and levering fossilized bread crusts out of the cracks in the flagstones with the back of a teaspoon. Animals had minds. People had minds, although human minds were vague, foggy things. Even insects had minds, little pointy bits of light in the darkness of non-mind. Granny considered herself something of an expert on minds. She was pretty certain things like countries didn't have minds. They weren't even alive, for goodness sake. The country was... Hold on. A thought stole gently into Granny's mind and sheepishly tried to attract her attention. There was a way in which those brooding forests could have a mind. Granny sat up, a piece of antique loaf in her hand, and gazed speculatively at the fireplace. Her mind's eye looked through it, out at the snow-filled aisles of trees. Yes, it had never occurred to her before. Of course, it'd be a mind made up of all the other little minds inside it. Plant minds, bird minds, bear minds, even the great slow minds of the trees themselves. She sat down in her rocking chair, which started to rock all by itself. Never seen the word mind so many times on one page. Ugh. Luckily it's in a different, followed in a bunch of different contexts, so it hasn't completely lost all meaning to me, but I'm having to enunciate clearly. She'd often thought of the forest as a sprawling creature, but only metaphorically, as a wizard would put it. Metterforically. Metaphorically. Drowsy and purring with bumblebees in the summer, roaring and raging in autumn gales, curled in on itself and sleeping in the winter. It occurred to her that in addition to being a collection of other things, the forest was a thing in itself. Alive, only not alive in the way that, say, a shrew was alive, and much slower. That would have to be important.
how fast did a forest's heart beat? Once a year, maybe? Yes, that sounded about right. Out there, the forest was waiting for the brighter sun and longer days that would pump 1,000,000 gallons of sap several hundred feet into the sky in one great systolic thump, too big and loud to be heard. And it was at about this point that Granny bit her lip. She'd just thought the word systolic, and it certainly wasn't in her vocabulary. Somebody was inside her head with her. Something. Had she just thought all those thoughts? Or had they been thought through her? She glared at the floor, trying to keep her ideas to herself. But her mind was being watched as easily as if her head was made of glass. Granny Weatherwax got to her feet and opened the curtains. And they were out there on what, in warmer months, was the lawn. And every single one of them was staring at her. After a few minutes, Granny's front door opened. This was an event in its own right. Like most ram-toppers, Granny lived her life via the back door. There were only 3 times in your life when it was proper to come through the front door, and you were carried every time. It opened with considerable difficulty, in a series of painful jerks and thumps. A few flakes of paint fell onto the snowdrift in front of the door, which sagged inward. Finally, when it was about halfway open, the door wedged. Granny sidled awkwardly through the gap and out onto the hitherto undisturbed snow. She had put her pointed hat on, and the long black cloak, which she wore when she wanted anyone who saw her to be absolutely clear that she was a witch. There was an elderly kitchen chair half buried in snow. In summer, it was a handy place to sit and do whatever hand chores were necessary, while keeping one eye on the track. Granny hauled it out, brushed the snow off the seat, and sat down firmly with her knees apart and her arms folded defiantly. She stuck out her chin. The sun was well up, but the light on this Hogswatch day was still pink and slanting. It glowed on the great cloud of steam that hung over the assembled creatures. They hadn't moved, although every now and again one of them would stamp a hoof or scratch itself. Granny looked up at a flicker of movement. She hadn't noticed before, but every tree around her garden was so heavy with birds that it looked as though a strange brown and black spring had come early. Occupying the patch where the herbs grew in summer were the wolves, sitting or lolling with their tongues hanging out. A contingent of bears was crouched behind them, with a platoon of deer beside them. Occupying the metaphorical stalls was a rabble of rabbits, weasels, vermine, badgers, foxes, and miscellaneous creatures who, despite the fact that they live their entire lives in a bloody atmosphere of hunter and hunted, killing or being killed by claw, talon, and tooth, are generally referred to as woodland folk. They rested together on the snow, their normal culinary relationships entirely forgotten, trying to outstare her. 2 things were immediately apparent to Granny. One was that this seemed to represent a pretty accurate cross-section of the forest life. The other she couldn't help saying aloud. I don't know what this spell is, she said, but I'll tell you this for nothing. When it wears off, some of you little buggers had better get moving. None of them stirred. There was no sound except for an elderly badger relieving itself with an embarrassed expression. Look, said Granny, what can I do about it? It's no good you coming to me. He's the new lord. This is his kingdom. I can't go meddling. It's not right to go meddling, on account of I can't interfere with people ruling. It has to sort itself out, good or bad. Fundamental rule of magic is that. You can't go around ruling people with spells, because you'd have to use more and more spells all the time. She sat back, grateful that long-standing tradition didn't allow the crafty and the wise to rule. She remembered what it had felt like to wear the crown, even for a few seconds. No, things like crowns had a troublesome effect on clever folk. It was best to leave all the reigning to the kind of people whose eyebrows met in the middle when they tried to think. In a funny sort of way, they were much better at it. She added, people have to sort it out for themselves. Well-known fact. Sharky's laughing at long-standing tradition. She felt that one of the larger stags was giving her a particularly doubting look. Yes, well, so he killed the old king, she conceded. That's nature's way, ain't it? Your lot know all about this. Survival of the wasname. You wouldn't know what an heir was, unless you thought it was a sort of rabbit. Womp womp. She drummed her fingers on her knees. Anyway, the old king wasn't much of a friend to you, was he? All that hunting and such. 300 pairs of dark eyes bored in at her. It's no good you all looking at me, she tried. I can't go around mucking about with kings just because you don't like them. Where would it all end? It's not as if he's done me any harm. She tried to avoid the gaze of a particularly cross-eyed stoat. All right, so it's selfish, she said. That's what being a witch is all about. Good day to you. She stamped inside and tried to slam the door. It stuck once or twice, which rather spoiled the effect. Once inside, she drew the curtains and sat down in the rocking chair and rocked fiercely. That's the whole point, she said. I can't go around meddling. That's the whole point. All right, let's read another 3 pages. It's 8:15 now. Let's do 3 more. The latties lurched slowly over the rutted roads, toward yet another little city whose name the company couldn't quite remember and would instantly forget. The winter sun hung low over the damp, misty cabbage fields of the Stowe Plains, and the foggy silence magnified the creaking of the wheels. Hwell sat with his stubby legs dangling over the backboard of the last laddie. He'd done his best. Vittler had left the education of Tomjon in his hands. You're better at all that business, he'd said, adding with his usual tact, besides, you're more his height. But it wasn't working. Apple, he repeated, waving the fruit in the air. Tomjon grinned at him. He was nearly 3 years old and hadn't said a word anyone could understand. Hwell was harboring dark suspicions about the witches. But he seems bright enough, said Mrs. Vitoller, who was travelling inside the latte and darning the chainmail. He knows what things are. He does what he's told. I just wish you'd speak, she said softly, patting the boy on the cheek. Well gave the apple to Tomjon, who accepted it gravely. I reckon them witches did you a bad turn, missus, said the dwarf. You know, changelings and what not. There used to be a lot of that sort of thing. My great-great-grandmother said it was done to us once. The fairies swapped a human and a dwarf. We never realized until he started banging his head on things, they say.
Wonder if that's a reference to Carrot. But is this book before or after Guards? I think it's before, right? I'm not sure. Farmos thinks this came out first. They say this fruit be like unto the world, so sweet, or like say I, the heart of man, so red without, and yet within unclued, we find the worm, the rot, the flaw. However glows his bloom, the bite proves many a man be rotten at the core. The two of them swiveled around to stare at Tomjon, who nodded to them and proceeded to eat the apple. That was the worm speech from the tyrant, whispered Quell. His normal grasp of the language temporarily deserted him. Bloody hell, he said. But he sounded just like... I'm going to get Vitoller, said Quell, and dropped off the tailboard and ran through the frozen puddles to the front of the convoy, where the actor-manager was whistling tunelessly and, yes, strolling. What ho, Bzogda Hiara, he said cheerfully. Footnote: a killing insult in Dwarfish, but here used as a term of endearment. It means lawn ornament. End of footnote. You've got to come at once. He's talking. Talking? Quell jumped up and down. He's quoting, he shouted. You've got to come. He sounds just like... Me? Said Vitoller a few minutes later, after they had pulled in the latties into a grove of leafless trees by the roadside. Do I sound like that? Maybe I read it wrong. Young Willikins... Oh, sorry. Do I sound like that? Yes, chorused the company. Young Willikins, who specialized in female roles, prodded Tomjon gently as he stood on an upturned barrel in the middle of the clearing. Here, boy, do you know my speech from Please Yourself? He said. Tomjon nodded. He's not dead, I say, who lies beneath the stone, for if death could but hear. They listened in awed silence as the endless mists rolled across the dripping fields and the red ball of the sun floated down the sky. When the boy had finished, hot tears were streaming down Quell's face. By all the gods, he said when Tomjon had finished. I must have been on damn good form when I wrote that. He blew his nose noisily. Do I sound like that? Said Willikins, his face pale. Vitoller patted him gently on the shoulder. If you sounded like that, my bonny, he said, you wouldn't be standing arse-deep in slush in the middle of these forsaken fields with nothing but liberated cabbage for thy tea. He clapped his hands. No more, no more, he said, his breath making puffs of steam in the freezing air. Backs to it, everybody!
We must be outside the walls of Stolat by sunset. As the grumbling actors awoke from the spell and wandered back to the shafts of the lattice, Vittler beckoned to the dwarf and put his arm around his shoulders, or rather around the top of his head. Well, he said, you people know all about magic, or so it is said. What do you make of it? He spends all his time around the stage, master. It's only natural that he should pick things up, said Hwel vaguely. Vittler leaned down. Do you believe that? I believe I heard a voice that took my doggerel and shaped it and fired it back through my ears and straight into my heart, said Hwel simply. I believe I heard a voice that got behind the crude shape of the words and said the things I had meant them to say, but had not the skill to achieve. Who knows where such things come from? He stared impassively into Vittler's red face. He may have inherited it from his father, he said. But, and who knows what witches may achieve, said the dwarf. Vittler felt his wife's hand pushed into his. As he stood up, bewildered and angry, she kissed him on the back of the neck. Don't torture yourself, she said. Isn't it all for the best? Your son has declaimed his first word. I think that's about as good a place to stop as any. Sharky say this came out first, though the Discworld storylines jump around a bit. I think they're mostly released chronologically. I think there are probably an exception or two to that. But mostly, I think, one book sort of progresses the world, and then the next one that comes out is usually set, if not kind of in the same time frame, a little bit later. But that's not always the case, I don't think. Unless it is. Maybe. So, he'll remember the words. He'll always remember the words. I think we've got a little bit of an idea of how that's coming about, probably along with he'll always be what he thinks he is, or whatever it was that Granny said. Maybe even combined a little bit with having an easy time making friends. Who knows? Farmo says maybe he was already thinking about making carrot. Yeah. Maybe this was foreshadowing. Or maybe this was the beginning of that thought. Sharky say, so not just the words to the Hedgehog song. No. No, I guess not. Although we did get the Hedgehog song making a second appearance. So it's definitely some actual magic in this one. We'd had some, like, probably magic before. But this time around, the three witches summoned up a demon and got it to answer their questions. Sharky say, to be able to be immediately off book. And good at it. Yeah. We were, speaking to someone recently, I won't name names, not that it would get back to anybody, but that was frustrated that someone else in the cast they were a part of, they were quite close to opening night, and this other person has not been off book yet, and the person we were talking to was pretty fed up with that, pretty frustrated. And on the one hand, like, I've known a fair amount of people that have cut it pretty close to the deadline to get off book. You know, sometimes it happens.
But on the other hand, it is kind of rude, isn't it? You know, it's means so that your people you're practicing with can't really practice properly themselves. Books, Brews, and Booze says this was a good section. My Fru Me said, so you're liking Wyrd Sisters? I heard you laughing a few times. What got you? What parts got you laughing, I wonder? There were definitely a couple of parts there. I liked the bit about the partridges. Bunch of whirring idiots. Just okay. Rude. The demon. Just come on. Run along. Banish me properly. And of course, Magrat with the homeopathic remedies that still work anyways because she's a witch. The demon and the vowels. Ugh. Okay, so here's something that I'm slightly concerned about is that apparently, just like currently, they are releasing the Witch's books in audiobook format. With quite a stellar cast, performing the various parts. But I have to wonder how that part's going to go for them, because clearly that bit was not intended to be read aloud. Sparmo says things that are made to be written rather than spoken aloud, yeah. And I know you love the monolith, yes. Not that much to it, they just gathered where the monolith was, but it just kind of like peering out at them. Maybe it'll have another appearance later. Mrs. Sharkey feels like I wouldn't be comfortable acting because I couldn't do the memorization part, but getting the words to mean something believable. Wouldn't be comfortable to mean something believable and with feeling. That's what I couldn't live up to my own standards of. Well, I think that's a thing with any craft, right? An artist, a painter paints a painting and people are like, it's a masterpiece, but the artist sees the flaws, right? I think that's just about anything that is an art. The performer of said art is going to see the flaws. Everybody here tonight, I think, has a copy of the book, right? So you could all see the demon's name. Also, I like how Granny, I think, got it correctly. Capitals and everything. Because there's a second capital H in there. There's a dash. Wixertl Jewel Puckles. Wixertl Jewel Puckles. WXRT capital H lowercase LTL dash JWL PKLZ. Where were you when the vowels were handed out? Behind the door? I don't think I'll need to say it again, luckily. Farmo says, I get that, Mrs. Sharkey. It's definitely a better time if you can get to the point where you're actually saying the words and not just reciting the words. Which, depending on the number of lines, complexity, etc., there isn't always the time, energy for. Yeah, I think it's very important, especially in like Shakespearean writing and things like that, to understand what the lines mean, right? Understand what your character is trying to say in that moment. And then that way, even if you do happen to forget a line, maybe you can improv a little bit and get the point across. And on the other hand, it's also more likely, I think, to actually remember the lines once you understand them properly. BBB says, wait, what was the demon's name again? I don't recall, and wouldn't you know it, I seem to have misplaced my book. It's I guess I put it under something. Speaking of under something, Hank. Farmer says, yes, please, say it again slowly for us so we can get it clearly. Sorry, I'm out of time, unfortunately. I'm out of time for the evening. It's, oh, look at that, it's 8:30. Hank. Oh, I don't see anybody else streaming. Books, Brews and Booze finished Anne of Green Gables. Oh, nice. On stream. And the Brew Crew picked A Study in Scarlet for the next read. Ooh. Demand we raffle off Hank. I'm not the one who made it. And Farmos is objecting. It's gonna go up. You probably haven't seen in detail the fan art wall behind me on this side here. But we got a few pieces from The Hobbit. Is it all from The Hobbit other than the dragon? Let's see, we got... Yeah, I think it almost all is. Sharky, say, favorite quote from tonight. Pull up a chair and call the cat a bastard. Yep, that's a, that's one of them. And Grebo just being like, what was that? Twitch, twitch. Alright, Books, Brews, and Booze, you got a suggestion for someone I could raid us out to? Pharma says the dragon, I believe, is from Guards. It's definitely inspired by. Yeah, definitely inspired by Guards. Sharky, say a quick Google of the phrase reveals it has literary precedent, generally meaning do what you like. Huh. I'm honestly, I'm a little surprised. That's something somebody else has said prior, huh? Bees Hive does bookish stuff. Bees Hive? Okay, so 3 E's. That's fine. If they're not reading a book, it's fine. It's someone to move on to. Sharky thinks we'll use it in place of make yourself at home. Pull up a chair and call the cat a bastard. Oh boy. Alright. Well, I'm starting the raid. Stick around for a couple minutes. Say hi to, no, poor Stormy. Say hi to Bees Hive. I hope everyone has a lovely night and rest of the week. And I'll see you on Friday, where we'll continue and we'll learn more maybe about the kingdom having woken up. All right. Have a good night, everyone. See you Friday. Bye-bye.